Hey everybody, I'm Brittany Harlow with VNN and I am on the chopping block at visceralchange.org.
Welcome back, everybody, to this episode of The Chopping Block. Season 4 is well underway. As you know, we have a lot of fantastic guests, and today is absolutely no different. I am here with my old friend, Brittany Harlow. Brittany, how are you today?
Doing good. Doing good.
Good to see you. It's been a really long time. For those who don't know, Brittany is the founder and director and lead journalist at Verified News Network, VNN, and they are based in Oklahoma. So I'm really excited to talk to you today about sort of your journey into just the field, really, of media, communications, the whole nine, and talk a little bit more about how you've seen diversity, equity, and inclusion really find its mark in or I should say where it holds a place in general
Right.
in the work of DEI and dare I say if in the media world. So
For sure.
what I like to do with my guests, I like to start from the beginning or as much of the beginning as possible. Now you are born originally in New Mexico. Were you raised there early on as well?
No, we actually left when we were about 6 months old.
Oh, and
Me and my twin
with
sister.
and then you and I met in Massachusetts, but you didn't leave and go to Massachusetts directly, did you?
No, and so we were born in New Mexico, military family. Dad was in the Navy, and so when we were ready to fly, I guess you could say, we actually moved to South Korea, where my
Oh,
father was stationed, and we ended up living there for a few years. Unfortunately, our parents got divorced, and so my dad stayed in South Korea, and my mom brought us back to the United States, where we were in New Mexico for a short amount of time and then ultimately moved to Massachusetts when we were around 3.5, 4 years old, somewhere around there, I guess. And
ah,
we bounced around Massachusetts for a while.
okay. And a piece of that Massachusetts stop was Malden, Massachusetts, where I'm from, and that's where we met in
That's
middle
right.
school, and your twin sister Belinda, uh, and we've always had a strong relationship, strong enough. Like I don't know if we ran in the same circles on the outside, but we were in the same class, so we definitely knew each other. Wherever something was happening, we were certainly there at the same time for sure. Um,
Yes.
as small as the city was, there's no question about it. I'd be curious though, as someone who's moved around and comes from a military family, to add that additional context, talk a little bit about coming up in the various countries and states in which you came up, the various cities, and sort of what role that played in shaping the women who we see in front of us today and who we're listening
Well, I would say that moving around, definitely you have to be really adaptable. You have to, um, if you're going to have somewhat of a happy, contented life, you have to learn how to get along with different people.
to.
And so I don't really remember too much of living in South Korea because I was, really young. And I'm sure as a young child, you pretty much get along with everyone. You're not really molded
Yeah, right.
into one type of person or another. But I would say that definitely when my earliest memories are when I lived in Stoneham. And so I lived in Stoneham
That's
for
right.
a couple years. And so we lived in, a pretty nice neighborhood. And then unfortunately, my mom got divorced again after she had gotten married, and we moved to Lynn, in a neighborhood that was maybe not what you would call the greatest neighborhood. So it was, you know, kind of there's a lot of crime, a lot of poverty, and so it's
Mm.
definitely different than the really nice place that is kind of, I used to call it the White House that we lived in Stoneham. I went back and
Ah,
visited it, later in life, and it was not as big as I remembered when
right,
I was a
right.
child, but obviously it was huge then. Um, and so we moved around, a lot of different places. I lived in Malden, probably the biggest chunk of my childhood that I could remember. That the biggest uh, span of time, and I loved Malden. I loved the diversity there. I loved, so many people from so many different backgrounds. I did, unfortunately, when I was younger, get into a lot of mischief and a lot of trouble. So that's probably
Mm.
one of the reasons why we weren't in a lot of the same circles outside of school. It's because I was probably up to no good somewhere.
I
But
remember those
then,
days. All of us were. All of us have to.
yeah.
I was. I don't mean to cut you
Woo.
off. I was. I don't mean to cut you off. Your sister shared a before and after picture once on. I think it was on like Snapchat, and I was
Oh
like,
gosh.
I was like, it was like when she was 14. I go, I remember this girl. I remember her entirely. I remember the pose. I remember the look. I remember the whole nine. And we were talking a little bit about how all of us, myself included, we had a journey for sure that we kind of keep in the background. So I don't mean to cut you off, but yes, please continue.
Oh, well, I mean, and that is just a really big part of who I was. Like when, unfortunately my mom did get uh divorced a couple of times, and so a majority of our childhood that she was a single mom. And even when, she had remarried, unfortunately, the man that she was married to was an alcoholic at that time. And so he was pretty neglectful at times, and we had a really rough childhood that I think it's different because I think a lot of, there's so much out there today about childhood trauma and how that
Sure.
impacts developments and behaviors. But at the time, being a really rambunctious young child who, took care of herself for a good amount of her life, I think that I got probably an extra amount of uh, maybe judgment even from adults,
Mm.
that I kind of have had to go through. And then even we left Malden for a change, and then we went to Belmont, which was very rich and upscale
Yep.
town that I certainly did not fit into one bit. Did not live there for very long. Got into some good trouble there, and then we eventually moved to Woburn, which was another area that was, a little more my style. So I would say, like, through the moving around, through, living in a single parent household where your mom worked a lot, all of those, they were not easy, but I definitely would not be the kind of person I am today. Certainly not the kind of business owner, would not probably be the same journalist if I
Sure.
didn't go through all those struggles during that time.
And that's really important. And I don't believe I've had anybody on who's from the same city, shares the same Malden experience that I can connect to in that way. I've had someone on from Lynn, and Lynn, for all its challenges, is most of that is grounded in like the system, if you will, whether it
Mm.
is policies that are created in a way to keep people a little bit regressed, and gentrification is really running rampant in Lynn now, and even Malden. I don't know the last time you've been there, but your experience is not unlike one that I've heard, and it's also something that I think those who find themselves in those negative situations are also trying to find ways to be somebody else. A lot of it is not by choice in some cases, and when I think about Malden during our time, I love to say between '02 and '06. I mean, Malden was in some cases right there with other cities in terms of some of the challenges we experienced, and you went over a few of those. And I'd be curious to know, was there a point in time throughout middle school, throughout high school, and I want to say you and I had science together with Mr. Bowers. Were you in that class with me
Oh gosh,
briefly?
yeah, yeah. I don't know how much I was in that class, but I do remember being assigned to that class.
Yeah, I remember that class a little bit, and you sat near me. And
Mhm.
my question to you is: was there ever a time in your youth you talked about how you don't see yourself being the business owner you are today, or the journalist even without this? But was there a time in your youth where you were like, this is my apex? I don't, because of my circumstances, I'm not going to amount to much.
um, no, I would say
Good.
no. Uh, I definitely, it was difficult for me because, and again, it's really stuff that I didn't learn until my 30s. So within like the last 5 or so years, in a lot of ways, I thought that I was very dumb or unintelligent, which kind of forced me to, uh, I mean, I guess it didn't force me, but it definitely influenced me to don't go to this class. Don't, this isn't for you, this area. I've had teachers in high school that told me that I would never go to college, and that I would
Right.
not just because we got into so much trouble. But it was later that I learned that, when you're neglected and abused when you're younger, if you don't have that kind of rich development that you need to have your brain develop, then your brain is not going to develop the way that it
Right.
would if were being taken care of correctly and not having to overcome those. And so, um,
Well
I
said.
learned that why math was really hard for me is because I hadn't developed yet. I hadn't really developed correctly, I would say, in those ways. But for me, um, it was really hard in high school because I knew that I wasn't a bad, horrible kid, but I also didn't feel like I had any idea what I wanted to do with my life. It was only
Mm.
so I actually, I went from Malden to Belmont. I was held back in Malden, and I was put into the Recapture Academy. I don't know, that was a very short-lived program where it was
I,
kind of like, are you familiar with that?
you know what? I feel like it rings a bell, but not enough for me to say I'm familiar.
Uh,
Recapture.
yeah, so basically it was like a 12:30 to 4:30 or some kind of afternoon program that where you were basically separated from the rest of the high school with a group of other challenged kids. And that, it was uh just not it was kind of like learn at your own pace, do whatever you want, but it was a nut house, honestly. Like with the
Recapture.
kids. Yeah, it was from Dr. Brown. It was his idea. And so we I mean, I definitely there's programs like that. I think that for all like the hard feelings that I had at the time, there are programs like that, 10, 20 years later that are thriving.
Mm.
But for me, we went to Belmont instead. We're like, let's get out of here. Let's try a new place. But the problems that we had, still followed us. And so
Mm.
we ended up, I quit school during that repetition of my sophomore year, and I never graduated high school. So
Mm.
I kind of bummed around for a while until I was 18, and then I decided that I wanted something better and that I needed some kind of direction. So I went and I got my GED, and then I went
Good for
to
you.
college from there.
Nice. Wonderful. That's actually a solid transition because that's popping up next.
Okay. But yeah, childhood, teenage years, total dumpster fire.
and it's when I think about um, when I think about cancel culture in particular. Usually, it doesn't extend that far back to our youth, but it puts into perspective the reality, really, that as Malcolm X sort of once said, we were all at one point in time somebody we're not today.
Hmm.
And you touch beautifully on this idea that if the brain's not developed, it can only use. I'm now going to infer from what you said. If your brain's not developed, you can only use 100% of what you have access to. I mean, that's the reality of a situation. And nobody should be held accountable for information they do not have. I mean, I can't stress that enough. When I do my own DEI work, I lead with the reality that you know what you know and you don't know what you don't know.
Hmm.
And if you have the information, I can hold you accountable. But if you don't have it, I can't expect you to have it. I can't hold you accountable in the same way. Right. And so as you talked about the youthful years and coming up, we all have some stories for sure and some discussions to talk through. And sometimes we don't dig as far back on old Facebook messages or stuff like that as for a reason. For a reason. But I appreciate you sharing that because it's been a while since I have sat in a Malden memory, and I remember when you all left, and we recognized it. We recognized you all. We saw you all in school for sure. We recognized a lot of. I remember a lot of the stories you shared and a lot of the things folks went through. but I don't want you and other people leaving this conversation and podcast thinking that it was, as a youth, this was something that you were the antagonist. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You were a product of your environment, as was I, and as was everybody else who was involved in at that particular time. So I just want to reinforce for the listeners, because the rest of the story is really going to get people excited who shared a similar experience as you did, Brittany, as you move through. So let's talk about, post 18, and you're figuring it out.
Mm-hmm.
Are you still in Massachusetts at this time, or have you moved to a different state?
So yeah, I'm still here. Unfortunately, uh, I ended up getting into an abusive relationship when I was like 18, 19, that I feel like really held me back. But it was really kind of at that point that I broke out of that I was like, I'm going to be somebody. I need to do something with my life. Um, and so it's funny that it's the unbelievableness. I wanted to be an actress. I was like, you know, reach for the
Hey,
stars, I guess.
why
Um,
not?
and I was like, but I can't just do that. I took acting classes at Boston. I was starting to get some traction, like getting callbacks, but I was like, I need a backup plan. So I enrolled in college at Middlesex Community College in Lowell. I was thinking that a good kind of foot in the door would be an entertainment news reporter. And so I was like, okay, I can do that. That sounds like a fun backup job and that I can do while being an actress. And so
Mhm.
I started to take these journalism classes. And that's when it clicked like that. Like,
Huh.
wow, I love journalism. I absolutely don't want to do entertainment news. I want to do like heavy hitting investigative journalism.
Nice.
And that's kind of where I kind of took off. I did most of my classes in Lowell. I did some in Bedford. I want to say I was like halfway through getting my associate's degree when my sister, kind of going back to her, she meanwhile had moved out to New Mexico where we were from, ended up
Hmm.
getting married, and then she ended up moving here to Oklahoma and inherited a house with her then husband. And uh, shortly after they moved there, I want to say they had been there for maybe like 4 or 5 months. She
Hmm.
asked me to move here to Oklahoma to help her, help out with the new house that they were having to restore and with her new baby that she
Hmm.
had just had that January, who I had actually not met yet.
Oh, wow.
So I said,
So you
okay. I said, sure, why not? I'll just transfer to college out there and, I'll switch it
finish
up
out.
and whew.
So so you mentioned excuse me, you mentioned being an actress, and are you still singing, by the way? You just have
I
a
mean,
great voice.
thank you. Yes, I sing. I sing in my car. I sing my child to
Okay.
bed. But
Okay.
that's pretty much where my singing comes in is singing my child to sleep at night.
Fair
That's the
enough.
extent of it.
I remember you doing junior varieties singing.
Ah, yes.
Do you remember the song?
Oh, of course. Yes, I do.
Okay. I remember the song. I remember the performance. I was emceeing that year. That's why I remember it. So,
Okay. It's
yeah.
not to cut in with that, but I actually remember even before Junior Varieties doing The Wizard of Oz, which my mom just sent me photos of that of me and
Ah.
my sister, because Belinda was the Scarecrow and I was
Oh,
Dorothy in that picture that she sent me, and I was
was
like,
that? Where was that?
Salem Wood,
Once you said Belinda was a scarecrow, I like it triggered. I was like, wait a
seventh
minute.
grade, seventh grade, Salem Wood
Yes.
School.
So you were cut out to be in front of the camera at the end of the day.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
the moral of this particular story. so so you also did some time working for the postal service at one point, right? Later on,
FedEx. Yeah,
FedEx.
I
Yeah, yeah,
worked at.
FedEx.
Oh man, that I worked at. Well, when I was, I don't even remember when I started there. It was when it was Kinko's. I worked in Boston Government
Kinko's.
Center, and I loved it. Like we worked right next to the courthouse, and that was pretty much the best job I've ever had. Like I worked in
Wow.
at Kinko's and slash FedEx office in Boston. Then I went and I worked there in Salem, New Hampshire, and I even worked there here in Tulsa. Like combined total of probably over 10 years.
Oh
Uh,
wow.
yeah, and
Huh.
so that put me through college.
Which is because you what I found was that you jumped from Kinko's slash FedEx to Cox Media Group,
Hmm.
and
Yes.
that's a from the outside looking in, that's a pretty big jump because you're going from really one discipline to the other. Uh, what prompted this? Was this the were you still grappling with the your time at Middlesex where you're like, I want to do entertainment television, and so I'm just going to go ahead and make this happen? Or how do you move from Kinko's FedEx to Cox Media Group?
Well, Cox here, the Cox Media Group that I worked for here was KRMG, and so and it is I've done all media. Like I feel like the work that I did at Kinko's now FedEx office, like that's where I learned how to use Photoshop. That's where I learned how
Oh,
to do document creation, all kinds of like media presentations. Uh, and so that is where I really honed those schools like graphic design without ever really needing to go to college for that. And so even when I
yes,
went to college for media, I knew a lot of that stuff, and it was just kind of like picking up tips and tricks. I
there
could
you go.
navigate it really well, and I loved it. But Cox Media Group um, here is obviously they do like they have internet and phones and like all
Hmm.
this kind of different services, but Cox owns KRMG Radio, which is the news radio station that I worked at as soon as I
Uh,
graduated college. So I graduated on a Friday. No, I'm sorry. I, I think it was a Friday or a Saturday, one of those 2 days. And then I started at the radio station on Monday. So,
oh
like
wow,
2 days
right
later,
away.
after graduating, I started at the radio station, which it was interesting. I always wanted to be a television reporter, and even
Hmm.
before I went to college, when I was looking to be, the entertainment TV reporter, you don't get hired without a bachelor's degree, and so that's when I
Mm,
was like, all right, I got to start it, I got to get it going. But I always wanted to be a TV reporter, but I couldn't. I was kind of in a hard spot when I got out of graduated college because I got married and I was with someone who didn't want to move. And like the biggest part of being a TV reporter is you have to move to the middle of nowhere for
ah,
a few years and get your live training out of the way. Do
yeah.
your mess ups where not many people can see you, and then you can move to a bigger station, a
Makes
market
sense.
like Tulsa.
Mm,
But unfortunately, the gentleman I was with did not want to move anywhere, and so I was pretty much stuck in this big market
right.
when I graduated college. And I got in at a radio station and I became a producer for them part time until I eventually became a full time news reporter for the news radio station, as well as a somewhat anchor occasionally, like on the weekends.
Sure.
And I did that for about a year.
And you got your bachelor's is in communication and media studies, and that's from Northeastern State University.
Well, yeah, and so it's interesting because it changed so many times. Like when I was in Boston getting it, it was mass comm, and then
Ah,
when I went to Tulsa Community College to finish my associates, and I got
mhm.
it. I want to say it was broadcasting, and then
Okay.
when I finally got my bachelor's from Northeastern State University in Tahlequah, here about an hour from where I'm at now, it was media studies. And so
Okay. Media
it's pretty much
studies.
that's a very nice umbrella term.
it covers it covers everything.
Anything that's
Well,
what I tell people now. Anything media, I can do it.
there you go. Well, on my side of the house, ethnic studies is some places have that as a degree, but largely it is a reference to like African American studies, Mexican American studies, anything that is ethnically or racially diverse, and as a focus. So I understand media studies sort of being that umbrella.
Big blanket
Um,
for sure.
you mentioned how you mentioned how advancement in this particular field and really most fields is almost impossible without a degree. You going back for that bachelor's degree, was that sort of a cementing of you saying, this is what I am going to do for the rest of my life? Did that kind of affirm that for you?
Oh yeah, like I mean, I'm pretty tenacious, I think. So as soon
Nice.
as I set my mind to something, I know that I'm going to do it. And so it wasn't kind of like if I'm going to be a reporter, it was more like when.
When?
And
Yeah.
it was just that it took me 6 years to get the bachelor's. I started late, you know. I
Yeah.
started part time in the beginning, so even when I eventually did make it to television reporting, I was a lot older than the other people,
Hmm.
other reporters just starting out, and that was kind of a self conscious thing that I had to get over. But thankfully, my mom gave me some good genes, and so when people learned my real age, they were kind of shocked. They had no idea that I
Ah.
was 4 or 5 years older than them.
I had. It's odd to say that you're a non-traditional graduate student, but when I started my master's program, I was at least in my cohort. I was on the older side. We had an older cohort. I shouldn't say that, but what I really mean to say is when I left that cohort and went to my first professional job in higher ed, which was at UNC Chapel Hill in the residence halls, I was definitely one of the older hall directors that we had, and it really showed based on the interactions, my interests in certain things, and the conversations I had no interest in being a part of at that point in my
Yeah,
life. Right?
definitely.
I,
I feel
I get that.
that.
uh, September 13th, 2012. That ring a bell to you?
um, no.
As I understand, it's the day you published your first article.
Oh shoot! I should have remembered that. That
And
was
you
10 years ago.
yeah. Well, I understand why you might
I
not.
did.
Trust
I
me.
just well, I just shared it too, but that's one
You
date that just fell right out.
Yeah, that's all right. Don't listen. I'm terrible with dates now. Like you asked me, what did you do? What'd you eat today? I don't know. I couldn't tell you. So
I would not know if
uh,
Facebook didn't tell me. So
exactly. That happened with birthdays too for my people out there.
yeah,
Just yeah. I know when your birthday is. Yeah. No,
yeah.
thanks, Facebook. You and that was 2012 was before you made the official jump into the media world, and so I'd be curious to know, Brittany, where was your head at that point in time, and when you had the chance to write this article and finally get it published, what did that mean to you as you were going on this journey?
It was great. Like I definitely felt the power of that achievement after so many years of being in school and working towards this. It was our student newspaper, and that is probably the class that I looked forward to the most because it even though it is a school newspaper, um, it's having your work as a
Yeah,
journalist published and shareable, and it was a really big step as far as being an official journalist. That's pretty
yeah,
much when I first felt like I was a real journalist at that point.
I like that. I like that. I When I was in grad school, I had a sort of a creative work, if you will, published that gave me very much the same feeling. Like, wow, and this is gonna live here forever, and
Yeah,
it's that's how I
I'm
feel. Yeah,
real.
exactly. You can see me. Yeah, and just affirming what you said earlier. Even as my memory serves, you were always a go getter. You know what I mean? You talked about being driven, and when you put your mind to something, you go for it. And fiercely independent is how I remember you and how I've always seen you. Very much a on my own terms type of personality. I'll make it happen when I'm ready. I'll go when I'm ready. I'll do this if and when I want to type of piece. So you being the founder of something like VNN doesn't surprise me. But my question is, was being an entrepreneur, that entrepreneurial path, was that always the goal, or did you kind of fall into that?
It's interesting, and this is something like a relic that I'm always searching for. I had a professor at Middlesex Community College. I want to say his name was Sullivan. He's unfortunately passed away. He was like a really he worked at the Sun up there. I think the Lowell Sun, and he was like a real old newspaper guy. Um, and so I remember asking him when I was taking his class for news writing, like, how would one go and like if they were to put their own publication? And it was just such a. I remember he's just like, what? Like,
Huh.
he's like, well, you could do it this way, and it was, I hate to sound super old, but it's like the capabilities of the internet, back then were
Yeah.
not, as robust. And so I was like, I would do it as like an online, like a website.
Yeah.
And, I wrote it all on like a piece of paper, and that was a goal. And I kind of tucked it away, and, you know, kind of fit back into that traditional mold, and working for, an established news
Hmm.
organization. It went from newspaper and then, TV. And I was okay with, going to a newspaper out of college, but I was afraid that, the newspaper jobs are, even before now,
Yeah.
newspapers have been shuttering and
On the way
closing,
out.
and it's
Yeah.
just a very volatile industry to to be a part of. But
Right.
um, no, I mean, it's interesting because when I got a job at the radio station, I was like, man, I really wanted to be a TV reporter. But then I fell in love with it. And I was like, man, I'm going to do this forever. I'm going to be a lifer here. And then I got laid off after a year of
Ooh.
working there. The whole last hired, first fired kind of
Right.
mentality. And then I was kind of in shock. And my news director at the time, April Hill, who is still a very good friend of mine, one of my best friends here in Tulsa, was like, you need to, she saw me like moping, like putting my stuff away and kind of like in shock. And she was just like, what are you doing here? Like looking all mopey. We need to put your television reel together. We need to, send you out there and
Yeah.
get you a new job. And so she reached out to someone that used to be an intern for her that worked at a television station in Texas. And I applied to a couple other places, television stations that were in the general vicinity, an hour to 2 hours away,
Right.
that I didn't get jobs at when I had applied a year before that. But then all three said that they wanted to hire me, and so I actually
Hey.
went down to Sherman, Texas, and interviewed down there at their main station. And that was the one that April had recommended. That her former intern was now the evening anchor for. And so I took a leap and I took a job with them, and I ended up working for the TV station down there for 3 years. I really,
Exciting.
yeah, it was.
Sherman, where?
So it's Sherman, Texas. The
Sherman,
area is
Texas.
called,
Texas.
yeah, Texoma. It's a very super North Texas. So we covered North Texas and Southern Oklahoma, which for the first
Oh, okay.
year I was with them, I was actually in Oklahoma. I was in Ada, Oklahoma, which is a few hours from where we are now.
Speaking of Texas and Oklahoma, do you know why Oklahoma has the key shape?
No.
Well, it's
Do you?
because, of course, I do. When Texas was applying for statehood, a piece of what they wanted, and no surprise, is to maintain holding on to enslaved people. Right? They wanted to maintain that. However, the boundary line at that point in time was sort of at Missouri, right? So we know about the Missouri Compromise
Hmm.
and that particular line, and Texas was stretching over that, and so they wanted to hold on to their property so badly that they just gave up space and said, we'll bring the line down to here, and that's why Oklahoma has that little panhandle that comes across that was originally Texas's.
Really? Man.
Really interesting, right? So,
Yeah, there's
so
a lot of interesting history
when
here.
when you talked about serving North Texas and Southern Oklahoma, it reminded me of that, and that made total sense.
It's pretty
Uh,
much the same thing. No,
and that's
just
it, yeah,
kidding.
for
I'll
sure.
get a lot of people mad by saying that.
Or if there's any way you can say it, it's gonna be here. Welcome to the chopping block. Hey. So I think that's a beautiful segue into VNN, where we can get to really the meat of what you do today, and uh why you are who you are and why you do the work that you do. So this entrepreneurial spirit kind of developed over time, and it was a little bit of your friend saying, let's get you back out here. Like, there's more to you than this, and you can actually define yourself. It's sort of the message I take from there. So let's talk about VNN. Tell me a little bit, Brittany. Tell the audience, what is it? if there's more about how it came to be, uh, sort of the genesis. How did you settle on VNN? Talk to me about all of that.
Well, I was about so I worked for KXII in Ada, Oklahoma for a year, and then after very persistent requests from my news director, I went down to Sherman, Texas.
Hmm.
Um, and I worked down there for a year, and then the weekend anchor position was becoming available, and so I applied for it. I was like, I want to be an anchor. This is my ultimate goal, my new ultimate goal. And so I signed a 3-year contract, I think it was, and I did it. The first year, I realized like I did not like it at
Mm.
all. Unfortunately, the workplace that I was at started to become like really toxic.
Mm.
And with some of the people that I was working with, I started developing like severe anxiety to
Mm.
the point where actually towards the end I was having and so I was the weekend anchor. I anchored 2 nights and then I reported 3 nights. But when I was anchoring, I ended up having like really bad panic attacks like every time that I was anchoring. Um, and
Jeez.
I knew that I didn't want to do that anymore. And it was kind of tasked with just working in TV for 3 years. It was not all that I thought it would be. I probably worked at one of the better stations. I loved the people uh, that I loved at my work.
Yeah.
There were some of
Of
them.
course.
Um, but just the nature of the job, how negative it was, how um, I really didn't feel like I was serving people how I wanted to be serving people. I was telling news from one decided, narrow perspective. It was never the full story, and it just kind of seemed like the same story over and over, just different faces. And
Yeah.
so there's a lot of problems that I ran into with news that I was not happy with. And so when there came an opportunity for an out in my contract that allowed for Tulsa only. There was talks of starting an independent network, and so I jumped into those and really kind of pushed them forward. So in a sense, I was kind of hiring myself out of my contract
Hmm.
um, when it was uh, these ideas were coming about. What kind of network would it be, and how abouts would this go? Um, Not only was there a big problem with news and the way that information was put out and the perspectives that was kind of repeated, there's also this other issue of social media where on Facebook and Twitter you have a lot of misinformation. um,
Mm.
there's more people getting news from social media platforms all the time, but is it accurate? Can you trust it? It's
That's right.
really a big question mark. And a lot of the time, the answer is no.
Fair enough.
So we decided to create our own social news media platform. And so it's essentially a social media platform that's designed exclusively for verified news. Um, Originally, it was created for me as a journalist that I could use as a platform to write and share stories. But it was really kind of, this collaborative effort from a lot of
Sure.
different groups of people. And so we have 4 categories when we launched it, which was journalists, officials, experts, and citizens. We've since added a fifth category, which is affiliates, and so different high quality news organizations that are kind of on the same path as we are also
Of course.
contribute news. But really quick after we launched this app, the idea is that everyone is held to the same journalistic standard.
Hmm.
And that's the name Verified News Network. Everything's
Got it.
verified, everything's transparent. You go to this platform, you go to our website, looking through our news feeds, you know that everything has been fact checked, has been glanced over, read through, to make sure that we're all upheld to the same journalistic standard. Well, pretty soon we realized that citizens don't necessarily want to be held to the same journalistic standard, and we did not have a lot of citizen contributions, but we had a lot of journalists that wanted to be a part of what we're doing. We had officials like here in Oklahoma, here in Tulsa, the city of Tulsa, Tulsa Police Department, that
Mm.
wanted to use our network to disseminate their information. And we have partnered with a lot of great affiliates since then that also have created this really great environment of news. And so that is what we offer, along with media education, as far as information about the news industry and the social media industries themselves. Um, but through our evolution over the last 4 years, we're now in our fifth year. The one of the most important things I think that we do at VNN, as far as our original reporting and our journalism work, is providing diverse perspectives and reporting on stories that no one else is reporting on, that's not getting a lot of attention. And it is crazy just how many of them are in
Yes.
Oklahoma.
I, it's funny that you say that because I think about how I'm engaged. Obviously, I'm here in Tucson and engaged in the work and with having ear to the ground with the community. And so many things go unreported here in Tucson, and for something, to make space for something that happened in Phoenix, for example. Now,
Mm-hmm.
granted, Phoenix is like the fifth largest city in the country, and the the reach and the scope is a lot greater than something like Tucson. But you would imagine that there would be a commitment to your community first before sort
Mm-hmm.
of reaching outward. And I've always got that vibe from VNN, that there is a really, really strong focus and commitment to the community, to this particular circle first, not maybe exclusively, but first, in ways that is really transparent and palpable. And it I think it really, when I think about the sort of the model, they're doing news differently, that really that strikes a chord with me because of all the things you named. I was just going to ask you to talk about how that model sort of governs what you do, and you already did that. And I think there's a nice connection between understanding the traditional way and someone who's had that experience like you, going through the different channels, and how that's really informed how you move next. Um, how far does VNN stretch? I know there's VNN Oklahoma. I know there's VNN Michigan. Any other states or cities?
So, and it's kind of tricky because um, we really want VNN to be to scale. And so we want to be in every state and having this be a great mechanism for journalists and other people who care about verified news across the country to
Yeah.
be able to utilize our platform. Um, and it's hard to imagine, but we've gone through a couple of different processes, and like, well, how we need to grow. We've had steady growth, but like I want more growth and I want more reach. I want more funding for what we
Yeah.
do, because the work is really important. Um,
Yes.
and so we've been, we took part recently in an indie growth program um, that helped us kind of fine tune our work. We recently took part in a Lion slash Google News initiative project, which was a very large company audit and recommendations for us to implement. And everyone told us basically um, that we really have to hone in and solidify our stronghold in Oklahoma before we can branch out. Because in the beginning, I was like,
Mm.
the more states, the better. Let's do this.
Right.
We found journalists that were about it. We had developed processes, um, but uh, and we do a lot of community work in Oklahoma, but we weren't. Um, there still wasn't a lot of awareness about that work,
Hmm.
other than the people that we were directly helping and
That's right.
their, immediate community.
That's right.
And so we did expand to, we were in Texas, we were in Alabama, we were in Maryland, um, but
Wow.
we have kind of dialed back. And I had spoke with our journalists, like, in order to be the best for you, we have to be the best here first.
Hmm.
So I'm really going to be working to redevelop VNN in Oklahoma, which is now officially VNN Oklahoma, as
Yes.
where I am working out of. But we do have two journalists in other states that are in it for the long haul. And
Nice.
that's VNN Michigan and VNN New York. And we were even in Massachusetts for a brief moment. But that's
Oh,
kind of
nice.
one of the things that we do, and we've lost a couple of reporters this way, is that we're here to help journalists. Like, we want to help ourselves and we want to be better. But one of the reasons why I started this was so we could be a resource for journalists and we could
Yeah.
help journalists and we could improve that quality of life. And sometimes our journalists work with us and they want to go back to TV, but they're between jobs. And so two of the journalists that actually partnered with us in the past have went back to television news, and we kind of just served as an in-between time for them
Sure.
to keep their reels updated and their work constant, and then TV snatched them up again. And so that's what happened to our journalist in
Mm.
one of our journalists in Massachusetts that was reporting there. But um, we
And
do have a
is that a piece of the vision, almost like a I don't want to call it a resume builder, but
I mean,
an up.
definitely. I would say
Okay.
so. I
Hmm.
would say it's a way for because it's hard. It is hard being a journalist. There's a lot of people who want to do it. It's a very cutthroat industry. You know, you work on through contracts, and sometimes your contracts not renewed, and it takes you a year or two to find a new contract and a new
Yeah.
market to go to. So that's definitely a way that we can continue getting high quality content contributions from journalists.
Sure.
Is, if whether you want to be a lifer with VNN and kind of go through our vesting program to become a part company owner, which is something that we offer as a way of like
Saw
maintaining
that.
journalists for the long term, or you just want to be here with us between television jobs to as a source of keeping your reel and your resume up to date and even earning money. Like, we have different ways that journalists can sign up and actually develop streams of income through reporting through our app. And so we're really here just to help all kinds of people.
That's great, man. That's I love that, and I love that whole idea. I maybe we'll talk offline about about some thoughts that I've had on something similar as well. So that's a
Good deal.
uh, I love that. Um, so now being public facing, uh, I know many people are watching you for better or for worse, and I've had people say to me like, "Hey, I saw this chopping block. It was great." I had one woman tell me that she got a speaking gig off of it. And I'm like, I know from who? I didn't know they were watching it. Oh, that's pretty cool. And then I've also had people say like your models and your theories are not effective. They're
Mhm.
they're problematic. They're not so on and so forth. And so it can be difficult to hear sometimes, and it can also be difficult to hold back maybe your perspective that you really want to share and how you
Oh.
want to share it. And because we have, in a sense, a responsibility, as public facing people, whether it's to our own kids, to the youth, to other folks. So, um, in that, Brittany, what is your responsibility as a journalist? And, do you have responsibility to other women and young women who have shared a similar story as you, or who are thinking about going out on their own in such a still heavily male dominated field and industry? So what is your responsibility as a journalist, and then do you have a responsibility to other women and other people who are looking to do something similar?
Well, it's hard, and there's so many different ways to kind of go off there. But I will say journalism is particularly tricky because as journalists, we're really not supposed to have opinions on anything.
Mm.
We're not supposed to have political opinions. We're not supposed to have real big opinions on social issues because we're not
That's still
supposed
true in
to.
2022.
Yeah. And I mean, I can see it. It's very important. And I do try to keep a lot of my opinions private because not to just I don't want to alienate anyone because there's still
Sure.
a lot of people out there that think that just because we don't think the same uh, on things that we can't be in touch, that we
Yeah,
can't be connected.
I agree with that.
I don't like to be around um, people that just think the same way as me. I like debating. I like talking about
I
different
agree.
issues. Um, but I definitely draw the line at things that offend other people. Like if,
Yes.
if you're hurting others or, offending others or
Harm.
mistreating others, then
Yeah.
that is something that I draw the line at, that, that kind of goes into my next um, line of thinking, is that something that makes me different maybe from other journalists, other news organizations, is that I am a human first. And so a
Nice.
lot of the times in journalism, it's, it's like we're supposed to forget that,
Hmm.
that we're humans and not robots, and that,
Hmm.
we have feelings, and that, so kind of going in with, I don't, if there's someone being hurt, or there's someone being mistreated, or there's wrongs committed against someone, even though I am a journalist, I will speak on that. And I think that I honestly think that anyone should do that, but I know that um, it's difficult, and a lot of people will probably stay out of it. It's not any of my business, or whatever. But I
Right.
think
Right.
that the well-being of our our fellow humans is everyone's business,
Yeah.
and that it's not a political issue, or a partisan issue.
Hmm.
It is a human issue, and so
Yeah.
that is where a lot of the my passion for journalism comes through, is with that mentality, is that we should all be helping each other and helping to make our world better. It is difficult, with kind of furthering the female perspective,
Mm.
here in Oklahoma, and even in my own household. Like, me and my husband don't agree on everything.
Yeah.
I will kind of be really quick to stand up for women, and what I believe in, and what I think, and what's wrong, with our society in regards to women,
Hmm.
and not really having much of a voice, or a lot of equity in this state and other places. And we'll have conversations like, oh, there's nothing systematic that
Right.
keeps women down,
Right.
and
Right. Right.
we'll debate that
Right. 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 Yeah.
in
I
our
mean,
house and
yeah, and
elsewhere.
of course, and you said a lot of good things there, and even as you close off on that point, this ability to, if nothing else, have the conversation, I think is something that is missing. Dare I say the word nowadays? It is the conversation is a lot less tolerated than it once was, and there's nuances to that. I mean, a lot of times the conversation can be or is framed to be harmful, and a person is coming from a perspective of harm. And I use that word because, as you were talking about, essentially on a spectrum where and when we can have a discussion, I've always used harm as that middle point. And my historical idol, James Baldwin, always essentially said, "You and I reserve the right to disagree with one another, so long as your disagreement isn't at the expense of myself or my loved ones." And growth and development, which is at the core of what we do at Visceral Change, requires discomfort, requires
Hmm.
it. It requires like intellectual dissonance and pushing and pulling. It requires that, because without it, I mean, you played some sports coming up, and you were a little bit of an athlete and you got after it. I mean, how are you going to get better if you don't i- introduce a challenge into what you're doing? If you lift weights, you want to put weight on, you just do 15 pounds all the time, you're not having the adequate amount of resistance to help your body grow. And so challenge and push and pull, and in this case, as you mentioned, like debate and discussion is required. It's necessary for the growth and development. However, I don't think, and as you said, I don't think we should feel the need to entertain something that is harmful to us. I think that can be really problematic. Uh, you you wrote a piece back in February on essentially the state of affairs for women and really people of color in terms of advancement. They'll only have sort of a fraction of a chance to advance in the news industry.
Hmm.
Two questions. Number one, why was it important for you to write that? And two, is there anything that VNN does or can do to help maybe bridge that gap?
Um, I feel like it's important um, always to kind of call out when there is not equality and not equity, and so that even through reporting and research and my own growth and the growth of our network is kind of really important to understand the differences there of things may be equal, but
Hmm.
they're not necessarily equitable.
Yes.
And so when we have these established systems of power, of one gender having more power than the other, or one race having more power than the other, um, and kind of just keeping those established norms. I feel like, and it's hard that a lot of businesses, companies don't, organizations don't see that you're really hurting your establishment. You're
Right.
stifling your own growth,
Yes.
and that is just
I say that all the
really
time.
it's because you're not, we are a diverse country, and even
Yeah.
in Oklahoma we are a diverse state, even though there are um, this established perspective that just
Hmm.
permeates everything. And so I feel like it's important to call that out so that it is addressed in other areas,
Yeah.
especially in news coverage, because you're controlling the news and information people see. And if you're only sharing news from one perspective, say that's adversity, or just negative news coverage of um, one race over another, or if we're dealing with gender, only talking about the accomplishments of men,
Right.
then you're only empowering one group of people, and
Yeah.
you're perpetuating negative stereotypes of another group of people.
Right.
And news is just so powerful, in media and information, that has a big impact in all of society. And so not only do we try with our news coverage to really promote diverse perspectives, and dig deep at in-depth reporting of these societal systems and issues that really cause things in our society to be the way they are.
Hmm.
Um, when we also are talking about uh, people who own media, and uh, who are a part of the decisions that are being made, that I'd love to see that change across all organizations. Here at VNN, um, we really try to align ourselves with journalists who also care about diverse issues and have like a lot of diversity in our makeup.
Sure.
So we have a journalist vesting program I mentioned earlier,
Hmm.
that allows that if you've been with us for a certain amount of time and you've contributed to our network, that you can become a part company owner of our network.
Amazing.
1%. Yeah, thank you. And I mean, this, it exists for everyone, like just how news and information, like it's not just me talking down to people or me
Sure.
telling people what they need to know. This is our community telling us what they need and
Right.
us acting on it. And so we're owned by three journalists as part of our makeup. And so it's me here in Oklahoma.
Hmm.
We have another woman in Michigan that owns 1% ownership, uh, a white woman, and then we have a black woman named Rocky in New York who
Hey.
has another 1% ownership.
Oh
And
wow.
so we,
You're on the stock market basically.
yeah, I mean, and I keep them. They are like instrumental. I keep in contact with them
Of course.
about the direction that VNN is going in, what we're working on, how to grow. We're looking for more journalists as part of this vesting program, so that people with news experience can actually have a say. And it's not just not having a lot of diverse uh, ownership. It's about
Hmm.
not having a lot of journalist ownership, because we have
Right.
people that own news businesses that have no experience in news. And that, I feel, is
Right.
a dangerous thing. But the
Right.
majority of our company, 51%, is actually owned by my husband, who is Native American. And so we're majority Native American owned here in
Mm.
Oklahoma, and the
Wow.
rest of the ownership is uh, kind of made up. And we have up to, I want to say, I think it's something like 20%, up to 20% of our company is reserved for journalist ownership. And so that kind
Wow.
of, we do a lot of indigenous coverage in Oklahoma and, beyond, because of that ownership is, and that stake is really important. And it's something that
Mhm.
it's surprising, but almost 15% of the population here in Oklahoma is indigenous, either
Yeah,
only
absolutely.
or in part. But you would not know that by the news coverage in the state,
No, of course not.
because there's
Right.
not a lot of coverage of indigenous issues, indigenous ongoings, having that voice be prevalent in the news ecosystem. And we actually just recently conducted a survey process through Trusting News with local indigenous citizens here from different tribes, and a vast majority of them said that when news is reported on indigenous news, that it is mainly negative and reflects badly upon the tribe. And
Sure.
so that really gets the questions going of who's, pushing this narrative. Why is this
Right.
narrative so permeating? And it's not, all malicious, but it is an ease thing, because
Yeah.
you go to your easy source of news, which is, government, your local uh, official,
Stations. Yeah.
and that is not the community perspective. And so I feel
No.
like that's a really big reason why the news has kind of left the community perspective. And I used to be really like negative about the news, like, yeah, they're just they're making the whole industry look bad. And but it's really a very complicated uh, problem, because the journalists and even their bosses are trying to do so much with no funding, and that the
Right.
funding crisis for news media in America is a totally different
Very
issue.
real. Yeah, for
That's its
sure.
own conversation.
Yeah. Well, last season I had someone on, like I mentioned, from Massachusetts, who's a news director, uh, and said the same thing. The coverage is very biased across the board, at least in his experience, and
Hmm.
especially at the bigger stations. And the
Hmm.
challenge is really, in his perspective, the challenge has become trying to uh, present verified and verifiable information that
Hmm.
that is honest and is grounded in integrity. You actually took the next question right out of off the page and didn't even have
Hmm.
to hit my mouth yet, which was, I noticed that there was a very strong focus on indigeneity. I noticed that there was one of your videos even said that you'll be focusing on in indigenous issues for the rest of the year. Where,
Hmm.
for the sake of the podcast, we're in October 2022 at the moment, and there's an indigenous section on your website dedicated to making indigenous news more mainstream. And so I don't think we have to revisit that, but you offered a lot of information as to why that might be the case. I do want to create some space to see if there's anything else you want to share there as well. But you definitely answered that question as it pertained to why an indigenous identity has a big stake in VNN. Is there anything else about that particular topic that you think would be helpful? That kind of cements why VNN does what they do in that area.
Well, I think that Oklahoma has such a complicated history, obviously,
Yeah.
from the forced removal of Native American tribes from their ancestral homelands to here. And then, particularly, I mean, in Tulsa, but across Oklahoma, then discovering that there was oil and natural gas and all these resources, that on the lands of you that they forced these Native American people to come to, and then then
And
systematically stripping their land away and essentially making them homeless and living in poverty. Um,
yeah,
I mean, that's something that's really not even taught very in depth in schools, like that history of
right.
Oklahoma,
Not in that
or
way either.
yeah, or how much social issues still exist from that
Yes.
happening. I mean, it was only, you know, less than 100 years ago this was still going on. And
Yeah.
even, um, the decades that followed, that, there was still this process. I mean, it's just it's a very negative situation, looking bad on the state of Oklahoma.
Yes.
So I think a lot of people would like to choose to ignore it and just move on. But the and again, it's one of those things that I don't understand, that people don't understand, is you can't move on
No.
without addressing and recognizing and remedying as best as possible, what happened. And so we're focusing on, through the end of the year and probably beyond, a new series that we have created in partnership with the Lucinda Hickory Research Institute,
Saw
which
that.
is a research institute here in Tulsa area that looks into allotment crimes to really raise awareness about those particular issues and those stories, which
Mm.
are, and it's crazy how unknown it is right now. Um, there's a lot of talk about, of course, the Killers of the Flower Moon that was filmed here earlier this
Mm-hmm.
year, the
Mm-hmm.
Osage murders, but that
Mm-hmm.
happened, those happened 20 years after it happened here in Tulsa. And
Ah.
that is, the suspicious deaths,
Right.
the swindling of the land. The
Yep.
city of Tulsa, the entire thing used to be allotted land for Native Americans, and now there's barely any that
The
still
entire
have.
continent.
Yeah, I
At one
mean,
point.
well, definitely as far as being Native American land, but
Right.
the land allotments were specifically like with the Dawes Act, when they made citizens register, and say how much percentage of um, degree of Indian blood they were. They were given 140 acres uh,
Mm.
for to live on, which is a way, actually, because Native Americans lived in communities, or they lived in, like, familial uh, settings, with
Mm-hmm.
their families and big groups, and so to kind of force them to separate onto these big allotments was another way
Yeah.
of assimilating them into European culture.
Of course.
And so, but each every area of Tulsa was a land allotment that was part of that Native American citizens' 140 acres. But through the court system, and flat out murder,
Right.
and other, jail systems, all of that land was lawyered away from these Native Americans that were allotted it, so that it could be redeveloped, and they could mine it, or they could build
Right.
houses on it, or whatever. Um, but there, this is a relatively not talked about thing here in
Yeah.
Tulsa, and
Sure.
so that there's just so many areas of work and support of news and information. I feel, and I'm not sure how familiar you are with Oklahoma history or all the craziness that's going on right now, but even like with the McGirt ruling a couple years ago, was a
Mm-hmm.
really big move from the Supreme Court, that affirmed that much of eastern Oklahoma is still a reservation. And so that
That's
was
right.
something that was not even recognized,
Mm.
really, in the eyes of the land, the state of Oklahoma. And the
Right.
state of Oklahoma still really doesn't recognize it. Um, but so this is, even 100 years later, these tribal nations are still fighting for sovereignty. And I think a
Right.
majority of the people that live here really don't understand that. And even when the news, was covering it, it really was not a point of, the sovereign issues of these tribes. And so, um, as you can see, there's a lot to talk about and a lot of work
Yeah.
in this space. And
For sure.
I was spread thin all over the place. We are doing like justice involved uh, stuff. We're doing stuff about freedmen coverage,
Yeah.
which is
Saw that.
the Native Americans, and not all of them,
Yeah. Yeah.
but some of them owned slaves and brought them, from their ancestral homelands. And But even that issue is a crazy one, because you have your Native Americans, and you have your freedmen descendants, and there's still a lot of hostility there.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but an important thing to remember, and that we try to kind of get through as kind of like a, you know a, a a thing to not be forgotten when we're talking about this is that not the Native Americans that owned slaves were the ones who were assimilated, and that's something that the federal government and the traders actually pushed as a way to make sure that Native Americans and slaves or freed slaves or any African Americans didn't align and unite against that the
Of
European
course,
colonists,
of
and
course.
so and that animosity still exists today. And what and there's a lot of people, when we talk about it, it's like, yeah, you these groups were designed to be at odds with each other instead of working together, and that is
Right.
an effort that still exists today. And so
Yeah.
I mean, it is relative to the same issue, but we have freedmen coverage and we have indigenous coverage, and they
Right.
interlap, but they are really big enough to have their own arenas. And so when we report, you know, we it's important for us a lot of the times to have them not competing with each other, because that does create a lot of hard feelings, a lot of divisiveness. And that is
Mm.
something that even I wanted to touch on earlier when we're talking about issues and different opinions. Like, neither one of these are wrong. Like, the Native Americans were definitely wronged here, and the freedmen and the enslaved people were definitely wrong. Like, they
Hmm.
could both be wronged.
Yes.
It doesn't have
Yes.
to be a competition.
Yeah.
And that is something that I feel like happens a
Two.
lot in any kind of debate, is that, like, you can have two people wronged, you can have two people
Yeah,
that
two things
have.
can be true at the same time.
Exactly. And so that's something too that I feel like a lot of uh, people who want divisiveness and who want people not working together and who want people, to be awkward and ashamed and afraid to talk about things. I think that that really works in the favor of people who don't uh, want people to unite and to, like,
Yeah.
appreciate their differences. And so
Well,
that's
that's
something that we try to do as well, is bring attention to that.
yeah, and that's why, and we mentioned offline a little bit, but that's why information matters. I mean, the number one reason, in my opinion, the number one reason for pushback against things like DEI and justice is misinformation. In my opinion, it's the number one pushback. I don't know if you knew this, but in states that are pushing back against critical race theory, which I'm sure you've heard of before, in states that are pushing back against critical race theory, they're also banning what's called socio emotional intelligence or social emotional learning, which
Yes.
is right. So they're doing that in tandem because if you had a sense of empathy, you'd be able to connect at least intellectually to what critical race theory is trying to say. Like if and in this case, right, if I knew about about the tragedies and the horrors that indigenous people went through, and if I'm in Oklahoma, right, in my own state of Oklahoma, then I would have a feeling of sympathy and empathy towards that. That would make me want to act in the form of justice. And so these states are operating in a way that says we can't have these two together, because if you have one, you'll likely have the other. Much like how you were sort of suggesting that there was this movement to keep blacks and indigenous folks away from each other so that they didn't team up and rebel.
Mm-hmm.
Because one of the oldest questions are like, weren't these folks floating around at the same time and during enslavement and
Mm-hmm.
facing not the same, but oppression in general? And
Mm-hmm.
that you start talking about the system at that point in time, and this system that people don't believe exists is not it's not it doesn't have a physical form. It's these structures, these policies, and these practices that are in place that coerce or indoctrinate or create environments where people feel powerless or feel like they can't engage in a certain way. So I'm glad that you were able to share on the great work VNN is doing for the indigenous communities, and also knowing that I know your husband probably has a decent stake in that, and that the
Mm-hmm.
work is still central there, because that's information that here in Tucson, sitting on Pasquayaki and Tohono O'odham land, we always try to make sure that indigenous issues are at the focus as well. Brittany, I only have like a question or two left. If you have to jet, let me know. But I got a question and a half and then I'll send you on your way. Is that okay?
Yeah, that sounds good.
Okay.
I got the time.
Okay, great. Um, you posted a shot of VNN back in 2019, first official broadcast, and then one recently here in 2022. And it was like, whoa, right? What a difference in structure, a difference in. I think you named like there was a orange curtain behind you, which by the way,
Mhm.
that orange is extremely loud, not in a bad way. It's grabbing, right? It gets your attention, and I'd be curious to know if you wanted to answer if that was an intentional call, but that's a separate question. But it was very much a like a whoa, like this is you can see the growth and development. Something I can really relate to when I think about when I first launched Visceral Change as a one man band show. Hey, pick me. I have something to say. To now this organizational development firm where we work internationally with people on strategic planning and policies and shifting organizations and top tier institutions and stuff like that, and having opportunities I would have never ever thought I had in front of me. So I get that. Um, is there talk about talk about the journey from 2019 to 2022, even if briefly. Uh, but what I'm really interested to know is if there is a moment that you're most proud of as you reflect back on this journey, the last 3 years in particular, from official broadcast one to now.
It's
It's a big
interesting.
question. I know. It's okay if you don't have an
Well,
answer.
side note, I quit my job at TV and I moved up here and with my uh, now husband to do VNN.
Hmm.
Um, and I launched my business, got all the balls rolling, took out this massive loan to build our first app, launched the business, and 3 days later I found out I was pregnant.
Oh,
So that was not part of the plan.
okay.
And so that was in 2019. And so that there was like there's no choice. Like now you're gonna do both of them and you're gonna figure it out. And so we started, with our investigative reporting. We started that broadcast, so to make sure that we're putting out videos
Hmm.
because that's a big important part of what we do.
Hmm.
Um, but it really is just I was so proud of that broadcast then. I was like, this
Yeah,
looks
of
so
course.
great. Like, this editing is, top notch and our graphics and it's just every day you get a little better. Every day you figure out something better. Now I use a green screen and have a
Right.
much more elaborate setup.
Hmm.
Um, but I would never have what I have today if I didn't have that back then. And so it's
Yes.
embarrassing. A lot. I'm embarrassed by a lot of things that we produced for the company 4 years ago. But there's no way that you get better. It's kind of like full circle to what you had said earlier, without taking those first steps and um, not giving up. And it's
Yeah.
kind of building off where you came from. And
Yes.
so we've done we've done a lot of great work, as far as I would say like our biggest accomplishments. And I used to think that like getting grants, and getting funding and that was like the most important thing, and getting our next big grant and like
Hmm.
seeing, but it's like it's not like I spend it all back into the business, so no matter how much I get, it's gone. I'm
That's
not
right.
getting rich doing this.
No, I get
I'm
you.
sustaining my life, as best as I can.
Yeah.
um, but I would say like the biggest things that have been like the community members that have said, like, we did a case back, a few years ago, I want to say, where no one else had helped this woman, that her grandson had been abused,
Mm.
and the DA had kind of, for years never pressed any kind of charges, never made any kind of decision in this case about her abused child. But we kind of, forced the envelope and pushed the issue until eventually, this DA's office was forced to come out and say, no, we can't press charges. We're declining to press charges because there's no case anymore. Too much time
Mm.
has passed,
Mm.
essentially.
Wow.
And so it's not the outcome that we were wanting,
Right.
but um, it was closure for this person,
Yes.
and this family that they would never have gotten otherwise. And I have one more example. There's a case that we've been working on, the April Wilkins case. I started researching it over a year ago, um, and did a series of in-depth stories. April Wilkins is a woman who's currently serving a life sentence in
Saw that.
an Oklahoma prison for killing her rapist and abuser.
Mm.
That she really got the short end of the stick in this jury trial that was, more than 2 decades ago. Um, and we started working with her family, of reporting on this news coverage, because unfortunately, the man that she killed was the son of a local millionaire, and he owned a lot of
Wow.
he advertised with a lot of the media companies here, with the radio stations and the television stations, so they wouldn't carry the story, because he would
Wow.
pull his advertising.
Yeah, of
And
course.
that problem, was up until this year, really. But
Wow.
we reached out to an attorney, as part of our interview series that we were doing, with trying to get this story out there. And one thing led to another, and this one of the attorneys that we reached out to give us comment on this story actually teamed up with another attorney and launched their own podcast called Panic Button earlier this year, to
Mm.
bring an amazing amount of coverage to this April Wilkins case. It's pretty much as soon as our well ran out, we're like, I mean, we're a small network. We did as much as
Yeah.
we could. We raised awareness. We kind of kept, ignited this flame and kind of fanned it as long as we could. And then we were
Right.
kind of like at an impasse, like, all right, well, what happens next? I'm like kind of
Right.
running out of ideas here. But this podcast launched. These two lawyers, they started. One of them started the Oklahoma Appleseed Center for Law and Justice, which is doing like all this amazing work in criminal justice. And they recently just filed uh, 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 documents in court to have April's sentence tossed out, or to her to get a new trial, just because of all the stuff that they were able to uncover
Right.
through their research and their work on this podcast, Panic Button. So it was amazing,
Wow.
to kind of see that, like, where our journey kind of ends, this other one begins.
Again, yeah.
And so I'd like to think that our work on the April Wilkins case here in Oklahoma was a part of this snowball effect that
Yeah.
has kind of led to this great change. And so that probably was the most incredible thing, was seeing something that we worked so hard on for so long, not knowing, if it would ever really matter. And now to see that, she might actually get out of prison, something we knew that we were never going to be able to accomplish. Like, we're not lawyers, we're journalists.
Right. Right.
We're just hoping
Raise the
to
awareness.
kind of
Yeah.
putting this out into the universe, that hopefully the right people will get involved, and that definitely happened
That's
here.
incredible.
So
And that's
it's
no
just
that's no small victory either. That's a big deal. The April
it is
family.
It is hard, because a lot of our work, as a small news and information, like, we have a pretty good following on social media. We have some good traction with our articles and our YouTube channel, but we are pretty much kind of like the catalysts that send a lot of coverage and a lot of work and a lot of things that are being done. So we don't really get a lot of recognition a lot of the
Sure.
time, when the snowball ends up being a big snowball. But it's like, we
Right.
know, where that we were talking about these things, before they became mainstream, and that
Right.
we were kind of pushing this awareness in like these different areas. And so a lot of it and is, I don't mean to bring God and spirituality, into the arena, and
Okay.
but well, it's kind of like a natural way uh, for me to exist, because that is that humbleness is kind of, really necessary for the work that I do. I drive
Right.
myself crazy if I was like, man, me, like, hello, like, look at the work I'm doing, like, this is really awesome stuff, and no one's really knowing what we're doing. But it's kind of like that connection, that, like, we're doing work, I think, for the greater good, the work that,
Yes.
I was designed to do, and
Right.
knowing that that is being done, and that, people's lives are getting better. It's kind of taking myself out of the equation, and knowing that that's really down to it. What our work is making things better for everyone, and they're not necessarily going to be better for everyone if I focus all the attention on myself. So
I love that,
whatever
Brittany.
you want to do with that.
No, super, super powerful and really, really profound. It's actually a beautiful way to get to my final question. You're killing the segues today.
That's what I
So,
do. Tie
uh,
stuff together.
that's it. Yeah, yeah, exactly. My final question, Brittany, and again, thank you for taking some time to connect with me and to connect with the audience on the chopping block today. Um, and you said so much and so much wonderful stuff, and took us on I think a really delicate yet powerful journey of your life. Really, there's a wonderful quote I came across it in my phone yesterday. I'm writing a book series. I just finished book one. I'm like,
Good.
I have to put a quote in here, somewhere, like as you where where I would sign the autograph, like that
Mm-hmm.
page. I had to find a quote. So I keep like a bunch of quotes in my phone, and I'm like, I came across one. I didn't use it, but it was from a woman that by the name of Deborah Hunter, who I cannot recall. She's at UVM, University of Vermont, and
Hmm.
I'm like, I don't remember ever seeing. I looked her up to see if she was the actual person. She was professor, and I'm like, I don't remember ever coming across her. I don't remember ever meeting her. Could have been at a conference. Who knows? She might have spoken somewhere. I don't know, but her name was listed, so I want to give her credit. And the quote was, "The secret to who we become is who we meet along the way." And that was really powerful for me because I'm big on mentorship and big on being mentored and being a mentor. So my question to you, Brittany, is in hindsight, as you reflect, is there anything you would say to younger Brittany Porter this time,
Mm-hmm.
who had this long road ahead of her in terms of uh, remaining open, listening to people, mentorship? Is there anything that you would say to younger Brittany to remind her to keep going, to stay stronger, that she is beautiful, to use the Gina Variety song?
Ooh, there's a lot I would say to younger Brittany. I've been mad at younger Brittany quite a bit.
Mm.
She caused me a lot of extra work in my current life. um, um, I know it's kind of, I mean, I don't know if it's really cliche, and it kind of, I would imagine, leave a lot of room for debate, because we all are important, we all matter, and we all are somebody. Even back when I was not living right and I was rebelling and I was, hurting myself in a lot of ways. Um, I was still somebody.
Right.
But if I could tell my younger self anything, it would be that you are going to be somebody.
That's it.
And somebody in the sense that, that matters to people, that helps people, that, is a good person,
Yeah.
and that is someone that is important. Because when I was, younger and kind of living through all that, I did feel like I didn't matter, and
Yeah.
I did kind of just feed into the negative things that were said about me, and how others, treated me. And
Sure.
um, but I definitely didn't know back then that I would be doing what I loved, and that
Yeah.
I would be part of, I'd be part of my own loving family, and kind of making my dreams come true, that I'd
That's right.
own a house. Like, I didn't think that any of those things would be
Right.
in my life, and that I would be, my life is, it's hard because I make it hard. I'm when you're your own boss. You're
Yeah. Yeah.
the hardest boss you've ever had.
I get it.
um, but it would be that you are going to be somebody, and that you're going to matter to a lot of people, because I like to think that I do, and that the work that we do here at VNN does.
I love that, Brittany. Thank you so much for ending on that note and for joining us. Where can people find you? It's the way I like to end these interviews. Websites, hashtags, ats, anything like that. Where can people find you if they want to get in touch with you?
So I like to think that, we have enough of a presence now that if you just searched Verified News Network in Google, that you'd be able to find all of our stuff. But
Yes, you
um,
can.
our,
I'll vouch for that. I'll
good deal.
verify that for you.
Well, that Google work is working. But our website is also pretty easy to remember. You can remember that. It's verifiednews.network. And so then you can link to all of our work and jump around there. It's a website that's about 3 years in the making, so it's full of lots of fun stuff. And
Hey,
then, of course, any way that you want to get in contact with me, any message you send on the website, I'm the one that sees it.
nice.
And yeah.
Fantastic. And make sure you have your sunglasses on. They're ready for that orange as you
Yeah,
hop on the
that's right.
website. I love it.
It's enough of a warning with kind of being it's a subdued warning. Pay
That's
attention, but we're not
that's
too
right.
offensive.
I love it. Exactly.
Well,
Brittany,
thank
thank
you
you
for
so much.
having me. I'm so
Oh,
glad I
my
got to
pleasure.
catch up with you after 20 years.
Yeah. Essentially, I think that actually could be spot on.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that is actually spot on. So yes, Brittany, thank you so much for taking a second to connect and for joining us here on the chopping block. And for my listeners, my people watching, thank you so much for joining us as we continue on with season 4. I'm Dr. Sherrod Robbins. This is Brittany Harlow, and you are on the chopping block at visceralchange.org.